Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. My name is Damani Corbin. I'll be hosting this amazing conversation with you this evening on this tech summit brought to you by Salesforce. Thank you to the Young Black Professionals for putting on this amazing forum and all of the team at Salesforce that collaborated on bringing us here. Today I have Nicole Johnson from Salesforce specifically. We have Bobby Allen from CloudGenera. And we also have Ronika Lewis coming to us from Google, and a recent, but she's been packing a powerful punch since she's been there. Ronika, if you don't mind, just kind of giving us a quick introduction and giving us a highlight on some of the things that you've been working on. I think it's been 7 months since you've been at Google now. You're on mute.
Might be on mute.
I can't hear you there.
Apologies. Yeah, it's been exactly 6 months, and it feels like a year. It feels like 10 years actually with the pandemic, but I'm thankful nonetheless. That's part of being agile. So since I've joined Google, I joined the commerce team and the e-commerce shopping operations, and there I've been heading up strategy and analytics programs. But I also pivoted as soon as I joined Google to help with the Verily Project Baselines, their COVID-19 testing program and platform to get COVID testing out to the United States. So we started a project, had 2 offices in Silicon Valley, drive-through testing locations, and then we scaled that out to over 100 across the U.S. And so that's just some of the things that I've done since I've been there, but there are a few others that I'm working on now, like our racial equity PMO, and a few other things that you'll hear about shortly. So thank you so much for having me here today.
Certainly. Thank you, Ronika. And we know that you were recruited out of your own personal firm, right? So I know that was a quite a bit of a journey trying to leave your personal patch, your baby, if you will, to join into the big Google machine.
Indeed, but it wasn't actually an exit. I'm thankful to work with an employer like Google who allows you to continue having your entrepreneurial endeavors on the side as long as they obviously don't compete with Google. So I also want to say that the things that I say today represent my personal experiences and views and not necessarily those of my employer. So you got to get the legal thing out of the way. But yeah, absolutely. No, I've been doing cloud for, since 2008, I can remember. So I've done over 25 cloud projects. So.
And today's title is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly of the Cloud. I'll pass the ball a little bit to Nicole. Nicole, you mind telling us where you're coming from today, as well as kind of a little bit of what you're working on at Salesforce?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. So my name is Nicole Johnson. I am a principal technical architect with Heroku, who is part of Salesforce. So my day-to-day is, really just working with customers, so figuring out, what are their objectives, helping solve problems, and, really digging into, how can we help get them to where they need to be with both Heroku and Salesforce solutions. In my sort of spare time, not really spare time, but, I try to prioritize making sure that I help bring other folks along. So I mentor a few folks, both inside and outside of the organization as well.
Love it, love it. I think giving back to our community is something that's always necessary. I know that myself, I know that Bobby is doing a bit of mentoring. I'm glad to hear that you're involved as well. I know Ronika, it's all about getting our people to 6-figure incomes and in the tech space. So I know you're passionate about that.
Very indeed, very indeed. As I mentioned, I'm recently joining the racial equity PMO at Google, but even prior to that, I've always had initiatives like 6-figure jobs in tech. Outside of that, where we were looking to get more underrepresented minority-specific Black people into high-paying 6-figure salary jobs in tech. So that's a huge passion of mine in my nonprofit, and that's still going. And I think that you'll hear some more things about that coming soon. So.
That's
Yeah, and
good. That's great
it's really
work.
important to make sure we bring folks along, and make sure we impart the knowledge that we wish we had as younger professionals. And I think one of the things that sometimes gets missed. So I'm technically a sales engineer. So I'm in sales. I report up to the sales organization within Salesforce, but I'm still in a technical role. And in terms of career pathing options, it's a really great place to be. So I want to make sure that at some point, whether this session or in Q&A, we talk about like what that looks like and how I got here, and why it is such a great career option.
Absolutely. And again, this forum, if you will, was essentially leading up to the Blackest Tech Conference. So if you have not registered for the Blackest Tech Conference, make sure that you do so. We'll definitely send you some follow-up info. That's September 24th and 25th. So please, save the date on your calendar. But some of the conversations are, the tech industry is so broad. I know that the majority of you listening today are primarily software engineers. But the idea for folks that are coming into the industry needs to understand that there's a whole ecosystem around technology, and all the different careers aren't put on a platform so that folks don't understand there are jobs like architects and solution architects and sales and pre-sales engineers and all these different operations and cloud development. Like, there's so many different opportunities for one to get in. Product management is a huge opportunity that every organization needs. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to slow down a little bit, and I want to give my main guy, Bobby Allen, an opportunity to introduce himself, let him know where he's coming in from, and maybe just a brief commercial about your company as well, Bobby.
Sure. Thank you, Damani. First off, thanks for having me. Nicole and Ronika, thanks for letting me participate on this panel with you all. Very accomplished folks in tech. So I'm Bobby Allen. I represent a company called CloudGenera. That's a cloud computing startup out of Charlotte, which I like to call Silicon South. So I'm representing kind of for the Southeast. CloudGenera is a company that helps folks with workload placement and transformation. So if you don't know the right way to take advantage of the cloud or not, or the right way to optimize the way your stuff runs in public and private environments, that's really what we help do. We visualize the art of the possible and we simulate transformation. So I've actually been blessed, Damani, to do cloud computing startups since 2012. My last company had a successful exit. It was bought by the former CSC company. And then I've been at this company for 6 years. Fun fact, Damani, about everyone at our company has a superhero persona. So our CEO is Iron Man and I'm Captain America. So the funny part is when you look at who runs the Avengers, Iron Man is the visionary, but Captain America is the field general. So I have some friends at my company where we kind of co-lead in some ways. And so my job as CTO and Chief Evangelist is to be the tip of the spear and to lead the charge and being the person who's talking about how our company can help transform their business.
Amazing, amazing. So well put, so articulate. Captain America, thank you so much. I also just want to impart too, we look at someone like Bobby Allen with an engineering background who does not have hands on the keyboard day to day anymore. And we want to encourage you to think of what's necessary from a leadership role, from the voice that you can have inside of organizations, outside of just being an individual contributor. There's so many different opportunities for engineers to think beyond where they are now and think about how the software that we're building impacts our communities, and how deeply rooted it can be. But again, we're talking about the cloud today. And I want to start off with just asking Ronika, who are the major players in the cloud today, and who are the up and coming or folks that maybe dark horses that we should keep our eye out for?
Yeah, major players. I think we all recognize the big elephant in the room, right? With AWS, you got to acknowledge them. They definitely have a target on their back, but I think sometimes it's even more important to reframe it, because oftentimes when we talk about the major players, what we are really talking about is who has more customers, who sold more, but not necessarily who's more effective in certain areas, whether it's security or whether it's containers or whether it's identity management or any of those things, right? And a plethora of other things. So I think we have to take a look at who's doing certain things well, but surely by sheer numbers of who sold more, who has more customers, we're looking at AWS from a market share perspective in cloud. And then obviously Microsoft, Google as well, and Oracle as well. You can't leave out a stalwart like IBM, right? But there are many other players in this space, but those are going to be your top major players by sheer brand, by sheer customer market share that they have as well.
So I just want to pick at that a little bit. Like usually I stop and I make the clarification that you started with AWS, Microsoft, and Azure specifically, and GCP, Google Cloud Platform. And
Yes.
then you also went ahead to mention Oracle and IBM, and I think it's necessary. But I put the clarification out there that when I speak about cloud, and this is me personally, I look at it as IaaS, like just straight infrastructure as a service. From who's the biggest players in the cloud from a conversational standpoint, and then I break out to explain that are we speaking about SaaS? Are we speaking about PaaS? Are we speaking about IaaS? And understand that all three of these components make up the cloud. So if you're speaking about just straight compute, storage, networking, like we have to split apart the conversation. And I make that plug because we can quickly get lost in terms of like, what are we speaking about?
No, that's an excellent delineation. I just want to say there's an excellent delineation that you bring that up. So not just compute, storage, and networking, but also security is in that framework now, right, too, with companies being breached and hacked every day. I think that we have to call those things out. So again, who are the major players when we're talking about at least those four areas, to your point, whether it's SaaS, whether it's infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service.
Yeah, I think, you mind if I jump in here, Damani?
Absolutely. So as you jump in, I was coming to you. So after you make your comment, I was coming to, is there like a skill set gap? Because we understand that many organizations are making a shift to the cloud. And I just want to talk about, is there a skill set gap in terms of what you're seeing and what you're, just your own personal opinion? So make your comment and then feel free to jump into that question if you don't mind.
Yeah, definitely. So I think personally, I've worked with, multiple aspects of the cloud, right? So, back in VMware days, you've got private cloud, and of course they're still around, but, private cloud is, sort of transitioning to more of a hybrid type of scenario, which I think is what we're going to talk about in a little bit. But you have IaaS, PaaS, SaaS, and then you have, different components of the cloud, right? So think of whatever as a service. So Ronika mentioned security. You might have a, management, cloud management as a service, right? So, companies are looking to remove some of the operational burden and complexity that they've built in-house in some of those private clouds and just, on-prem data centers and server racks on top of server racks. Even things like virtual networking, right? So when you think about things like microsegmentation, that's extremely difficult to do in a physical data center. And those types of tools, overlay some of those components that we talked about, right? And the advantage to that is now you're consuming these components as a service, and you've removed a lot of that overhead, that operational overhead, that complexity that, when you think about it, looking at some of the security breaches that we see, a good number of them are due to some kind of misconfiguration. So the thing that the cloud represents is an opportunity to start applying more standards and automation on top of the configuration and management that's associated with building and deploying all these components, right? And I want to go back to your comment about dark horses in the industry. Based on, kind of the evolution that I saw, I remember back in the day when Microsoft released Hyper-V, and, I worked at VMware and our customers said, oh, Hyper-V is free. We're going to go use it. Sure. Let us know how that works out. But, you look at the evolution of that, and it's really interesting how far along Azure, the IaaS offering, even the PaaS offering has come. Now, I'm going to throw out a shameless plug here. In my opinion, Heroku is the best PaaS. It's my favorite to use. It's interesting because, when you talk about organizational gaps and knowledge gaps, I think the gap is less about the components. Like there are some nuance to building and deploying in the cloud, but I think a lot more of that gap is around process and operations. So, when you start to pick apart processes that companies have, you start to see, why are we doing it this way? I don't know, because the team before me did it. And so you start doing things like, value stream mapping, whiteboarding, through a process, through an infrastructure, and you start to uncover inefficiencies, right? So that's where I think a lot of the knowledge gap exists, because you can learn the technology. But, if we start with the technology and then try to solve the problem with the technology versus examine the process and say, okay, how can we do this better? And then apply the correct technology. I think that's where a lot of organizations stumble.
Nice. You hit on something. People, process, and products. So people say people, process, technology. I like the products. Keep the P's going. But it's true, right? Like, and a lot of it goes from an operational standpoint, and that brings me to a thought on DevOps, right? Talking about development and operations, but I won't go there just yet. What I wanted to do prior to going too deep, you mentioned multi-cloud and hybrid cloud. Bobby, do you mind just kind of giving me a clarification on like what is multi-cloud, what is hybrid cloud?
Sure.
Like, why should people care? How are they different? Give me your thoughts.
Yeah, so I would define multi-cloud as people that are leveraging multiple public clouds at the same time. So maybe you're running stuff in Amazon, you're running stuff in AWS, you're running stuff in GCP. Hybrid cloud, on the other hand, is usually the combination of public and private cloud at the same time. Now, those are the definitions. Those are not, should you do it, right? That's kind of, can you do it? And I would offer this, right? I'm going to go back to Bo Jackson. I'm going to date myself back to Techno Bowl days. And I'll argue, Damani, that mastering multiple clouds is about as realistic as mastering multiple sports. There's a reason we don't have multiple people that were all-stars in multiple sports. You might know it, but can you master it? And what I think is happening is a lot of people are trying to master a whole bunch of different things. This makes you kind of a jack of all trades and a master of none. And what I'm seeing is this. I'm going to go back to something that you kind of said that's a little bit controversial, right? When we look at the big three, as Ronika talked about, Amazon, Azure, Google, I see a lot of people, Damani, that are not necessarily saying Azure's better than AWS. They're saying they won't use AWS because they compete with Amazon. Two different things. So I think this whole cloud conversation gets really interesting if AWS and Amazon ever divest from each other. Then we'll have real competition, not Microsoft winning by default. Anybody that competes on the retail side, the logistics side, anybody shipping products, bookstores, retail, they're not going to touch AWS. So I think this multi-cloud thing gets a lot more interesting if that divestiture happens sometime in the future.
Interesting. Ronika, you were itching to jump in there. Let me take that on. Go ahead.
I appreciate that. No, on a couple of things. Nicole made some really excellent points, right? So first off, you mentioned the cloud skill set gap, where the gap's at, and then Bobby kind of touched on, you can't be a jack of all trades and master of none. So I kind of want to address both of those separately, but at the same time. So first off, I think, when we look at cloud technology, cloud is totally different than what, we've had for eons, right? On-premise. So I'm still very security minded first. And everything. And I think many cloud providers are moving to that space now where they're thinking security first. You can't secure the cloud the way that you secure on-prem applications or even your on-premise infrastructure. So from a cloud skill set perspective, absolutely there is a gap, right? You know, I've visited many customers in my pre-Google days who were trying to use their on-prem database, you know, administrators to set up, you know, their multi-cloud or technically their hybrid cloud environments, and it just wasn't working. Right. So there is a huge skill set gap there. And I think part of the reason is you have these professionals and, you know, who are elite expert professionals in their own right and on-prem, but we're talking now cloud. Right. And so we're talking sometimes, you know, we're looking at a running virtual private, you know, networks that connect, you know, multiple cloud service providers. Right. To make sure that data from this financial system doesn't get, you know, taken over by someone else, right? So there's a lot of different skills that are needed to make sure that that happens in a way that protects not only the customer, right, that cloud customer, but also the individual users whose data that's going to be in that cloud. So from a skills gap perspective, we can go on that all day long. So there are definitely some database skills, you know, that are going to need to have to kind of morph into more of a cloud database architect, I would say. And then on the mastering multiple cloud environments, every cloud environment has shifted. I would even say that we're now into like Gen 2, maybe 3.0 cloud, if you will, right? So first generation cloud, totally different now in 2020 than it was, or the cloud now is totally different than it was previously, right? So we have to look at what those multiple cloud environments are and get people upskilled so that they can manage those cloud environments.
Damani, can I jump in there for a second? I think Ronika said something that's really interesting. So my mantra this year is that technology is the easy part, data and behavior are the hard parts. And I think the biggest skill set, watch this, I think the biggest skill set people need to have is the ability to ask why. Because we're doing a lot of stuff at cloud. Cloud helps you be foolish at scale is what I say. If you were doing something dumb in the data center and you go to the cloud, you just added fuel to the fire then. And what ends up happening is a lot of people, Damani, they're falling in love with the technology, right? I'm going to steal from Nicole for a second, right? People, process, product. I like people, process, problem. Who are you actually solving a problem for? And part of the challenge is that we're not asking the right question. We're falling in love with tech and tools. Tools help you, Damani, with better answers and faster results, not better questions. And that's usually the issue. We're asking the wrong question. Why are we doing this is really what people need to be able to ask. We have technologists, and I'll end on this, Damani. Knowing when to use something means that you understand it. Knowing when not to use it means that you really understand how to help the business. That's what we're missing right now.
I'll do you one better.
Go ahead, Nicole.
Sorry, Damani, I'm itching over here.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So there's a couple things. So I want to go back to Ronika's comment that you can't secure the cloud the same way you secure your data center. I would actually beg to differ because, so first of all, I've seen far more flagrant offenses of security in on-prem data centers and just mind-boggling even. But when you think about it, the cloud is it's typically a shared security model, and that depends on what layer you're operating at, right? So, you know, SaaS is a different, you know, layer of security and governance in terms of shared responsibility than you are at IaaS, right? So, you know, two very different things. But, you know, when you think about the platform that you're given, right, and the tooling that exists to manage security in the cloud at scale, who do you think is going to be able to provide more resources towards building effective tooling to secure an environment at scale? Your network and security team, unless you are in a really large organization with a high level of expertise, or a cloud company who does that as their primary means of business, right? And even with a highly skilled networking and security team, you know, those folks have probably been around for a while. And going back to Bobby's comment about, you know, people, process, problem, there's probably some old crusty processes that folks are used to doing that may not necessarily apply to this new environment, right? So to your point about the skills gap, I think that's an important distinction, but, also add in things like governance, access. How are we controlling who has access to what at scale? How are we controlling who has the ability to make changes to an individual system or at scale? How are we making those changes? How are we testing that those changes are valid and within compliance, right? So all the tools to do that exist, I guess, in more prevalence, in my opinion, for cloud-based platforms. So I think, when we talk about, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, and just trying to figure out how to apply good principles, not based on the tools that you're using, but on what actually needs to happen, what needs to be secured, what the correct process is. I've found it easier to do in the cloud.
I'll close. I don't want us to go back and forth because we can go down a deep hole of that security model. Mm-hmm. And I think there's another panel on security, so I don't want to go too deep there. I want to pick on something Bobby said in regards to us asking why. And I think as organizations start thinking about the software, they need to think about what value am I delivering to my customers. And I think some of the use cases that I push organizations to think about cloud, and not just cloud, because everyone can do a lift and shift. I more push cloud native. Like, are you taking the time to rebuild, refactor applications in a way that is useful for the business so that you can deliver value to your customers? And I spent a lot of time with executives boiling this down to talk about what's the value that you want to see and the outcomes. So I'll start with Ronika. What do executives care about today as it relates to the cloud?
It really depends on which executive you talk to, right? You talk to a CFO, he's going to tell you one thing, right? You talk to a CEO, he's definitely going to tell you something different, maybe very visionary, but you get down and start talking to your folks in technology versus your folks in business, and maybe the CFO is also one of the business stakeholders. But I want to kind of reframe this too, because sometimes we look at technology as not part of the business, and it really should be. You know what I mean? I think that you're going to get different answers. Different executives are going to have different desires and needs, and that's appropriately so. That's why they're in those positions. But we need to start getting everyone to think about what Bobby said is, what problem are we really trying to solve? And then everyone basically comes together. It's a meeting of the minds, and they all have the same goal. But some of the things that obviously that I've heard executives mention to me in meetings that I've sat in with them, strategy meetings, finance, budgeting meetings, as it relates to the cloud, digital transformation and migration, it is the why. They want to know what value add is this going to add to their business. Some of the other organizations may have had an event that caused them to now be considering the cloud, right? So we're in their offices discussing this because there was some external or internal event that pushed them to that point. And so for them, it might be security. How secure is this? I've had previous clients who the COO was breached, and they called and said, hey, we need to lock everything down immediately. Well, obviously, as a good partner that we had already locked everything down. So the part of their organization that was breached was not the part of the cloud that we were responsible for and that we set up and that we secure. And so thinking about those things ahead of time, I think, those are things that you could do that makes executives happy. Other things that they're very concerned about is, their talent, right? So again, we initially touched on the skill gap, if any, but it is, how do we train our internal in-house talent so that they can take ownership of this? And will they even have the access to own it? Sometimes they're very worried that they won't have the ability to put their hands on it, right? You know, the data center, you know, you could just walk in the data center room and go and see everything. But with the cloud, sometimes they get this kind of a deer in the headlights, you know, thought process, not maybe the look, but the thought process is, will we have access to go in and add resources when we need it? Will we have access to go in and do a myriad of things, right? And so access becomes a very big thing, as well as making sure their internal support team is skilled enough to be able to handle that without having to always reach out to third-party providers. And then obviously, depending on whatever use cases exist for why they're going into the cloud and what workloads or what apps they have in the cloud, they're going to have different needs, right? Hey, we're growing from 50-person startup to 100 this year, and next year we're going from 100 to 300, and next year we're going from 300 to 1,000. You're going to need a totally different compute, storage, and networking requirements at that point, right? And depending on what your customer base is as well. So a lot of those concerns are there for them too. How quickly can we scale up? How quickly can we scale up resources and have them running? So it depends on which executives you talk to.
Appreciate it. Appreciate it. Bobby, digital transformation is a huge topic. I think it's fading out this year. I think in the past 2 years, it was very hot. If you can piggyback on, again, what executives are seeing, and then kind of go into, from a digital transformation perspective, what's low-hanging fruit for organizations to get into the cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question, Damani. So I'm going to give so Ronika's spot on, right? Depending on which executive you talk to, which role you talk to, you're going to get different things, but I want to give kind of two extremes, and I want to tell you a story around why people like the cloud. So when I was on the road a whole lot, gone all week, come back on the weekend, it was not beneficial to my wife and I for me to spend 4 hours in the yard. So me cutting my grass was better for my wallet. Me not cutting my grass was better for my relationship. So a lot of people want to go to the cloud because they don't want to cut the grass in their data center anymore, and they want to spend more time with their business partners. That's what they like about the cloud, right? It's the appearance of innovation, lowering the types of work and the types of overhead that I want to pass off or outsource to somebody else. But if I had to pay for each cut, Damani, based on how many blades of grass got cut that week, right? Where the price for that cut could have ballooned up to the price of a mortgage payment, that's what scares people, right? So you've taken something in a business, and let me make this point too. There's a difference between a consumer-facing app like Netflix or Fortnite and an internal app like a password reset. If my expense goes up for Fortnite, the value and the revenue went up. But if I put a password reset or an internal app in the cloud and the bill goes up, that just means I'm going to get fired. So that's what scares people about the cloud. I took something with a ceiling on the value and put it in a place with potentially unlimited spend. So again, possibilities are there, but it scares people. And what's going to happen, Damani, is the executives who want to embrace innovation, and actually this is a whole nother point we could go into. I'll just say this. A lot of executives don't really want to change. They want to talk about change. And if you think about how many executives all of us on this call have talked to, they brought in Accenture, they brought in Deloitte, they brought in Amazon, they brought in Dell. They haven't actually changed anything. They want to look like they're changing, and they want to show they have a plan, but they didn't really change anything. So to land the plane, Damani, a lot of executives want to look like they're changing, because talking about change is easy. Actually changing is hard.
Interesting. Interesting. I heard a little bit what I'll boil it down, app rationalization. So trying to rationalize the apps that you may think you want to put into the cloud. For example, customer facing apps that have a impact on the business.
Apps that need scale. Apps that need scale.
App that needs scale.
Apps that need scale. And I think to answer the other part of your question, Damani, this is opinion for a second. If you look at a lot of the surveys, some of the most successful higher level services are database as a service, right? I think higher level services that don't require you to refactor your code are going to be the most valuable, right? And my analogy for this, Damani, is like, if grandma's 80 years old, I'm not going to put a $10,000 transmission in her car because she's going to stop driving next year. A lot of us are refactoring apps that are going to die next year. So if I can take that code and run it in a different way without refactoring it, like the SQL code for my database, that's going to be hot, because then the benefit is going to be worth the investment. So DBAS is what I'd recommend. If you want to know where to start, that's where I'd begin.
Wow. Nicole, you're itching over there. I want to let you chime in. There was a lot said in the past too. I'll let you jump in.
Okay. So I think, when we think about digital transformation, there's so much there, right? So there's app rationalization, but the data conversation, I think, is actually one of the most valuable conversations that we can have, right? So, when you think about how companies used to provide provide services and do business, and how they used to, understand their audience and their market, how they collected data about their customers, it was extremely disjointed. And so how do you take all those different sources of data, and put them into a place where you can now leverage that complete profile of your customer, right? And I'm not even talking about, Salesforce Customer 360, right? This is, just fundamental principles of understanding your customer. So how do you create a situation where you can leverage the services that your customers already love, maybe improve those services, make them either digitally available if they're not, or just make a better user experience, right? There's tons of studies that show if a person goes to your website or your app and they can't figure out where they're going or what they're doing, or it takes a long time to load, they're going to leave, right? So making sure that user experience is part of that digital transformation is important, but making sure the profile of that customer is complete and enriched is another really important part of that. So when we talk about database as a service, that's something that, like Bobby said, being able to transfer code that you already know, that you already have built, that still makes sense to that now service that you remove some of that operational overhead from, and you can now scale that, in different ways. That's part of what digital transformation is really going to provide going forward.
We're running low on time. I just want everyone who's watching in to thank you for your time. We're not ending yet. We're gonna close out. But if you want to catch us with some questions, please join. We'll be around for 15 minutes for Q&A. So please join the separate room for Q&A. We'll be around answering some questions. If we can just do a round of closing thoughts, what do you want to leave with the folks that are listening? Bobby, not that I want to guide what you're saying, but for the software developers out there, like I know you want them, you want them to do more. You want more out of them. So I'm going to push you to kind of share in that direction, if you don't mind. Sure. And then I have the ladies end off.
Sure. I mean, I started out as a software developer. I actually had the privilege of actually helping teach programming at the University of Michigan when I was a grad student there. So development is not something that I have any issues with, and I still do a little bit of stuff on the side. But I think one of the things that I would challenge folks with is, does what you're doing now age well? How many 60 or 70-year-old developers do you see? And you need to think about, how can I get into conversations that are going to guide the business? And so I moved from development into project management because I wanted to be in the room when the decisions are made. I don't want to just get requirements for something that's already decided. So I'll land here, Damani. I want to just challenge people to not let folks put you in a box. There are times where if you present yourself well, the role that you are the best fit for may not exist yet. So you may need to embrace hybrid roles. I actually had hybrid roles when I worked for Intel Corporation, where I was a hybrid developer and project manager because I made the case that I could do both. In closing, Damani, I'll say this. I want everybody to embrace the fact that everything new isn't good and everything old isn't bad. Don't get so infatuated with all this new tech that you think that you're old school, you're out of whack. Look, everything new isn't worth embracing and everything old isn't worth throwing away. Figure out which old things to remix and which new things to retain. Combine that with your wheelhouse and you may have another role that you propose to unlock your value for that company.
Wow. Bobby Allen, I appreciate you. Shout out to CloudGenera. We appreciate them allowing you to speak on this forum.
Thank you.
Nicole Johnson from Salesforce, Heroku specifically. You mind closing us out, just giving us a quick recap and what you would leave with our audience?
Sure. So I think two of the most valuable things that I've learned in my career is, number one, go master your ability to speak in front of a room, your ability to lead a room. It will pay dividends. One of the first positions that I got that I really wanted, I asked the person who led that team, how do I get on your team? He said, go to Toastmasters, learn how to speak. You can go to any public speaking class. It has absolutely paid dividends, because if you can communicate clearly what you're doing, or the problem that you're solving, or why the service that you're providing is of value, it will absolutely pay off in the end. So the second thing is, you absolutely belong in the room. There are times where we might feel like, man, I don't know all these things that these other people know. Guess what? They might not know either. So, and that's the thing about technology, you will never know everything. So the ability to do problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to navigate through tough conversations, that's the skill that you really want to build.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Nicole. Ronika, close out the session for us, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Thanks, Damani. I'll definitely say, echoing on some of the things that have already been said, you know, we all deserve to be in the room, especially women. And I want to take this time to specifically speak to women of color. You know, some of my biggest supporters in my technology journey have been men, and coincidentally have been Black men. So I'm really thankful for their mentorship. I'm thankful for the journey. At one point, I went from learning HTML and CSS and Microsoft Front Page. I know some of you millennials won't know what that is, but feel free to go out and Google that, to pulling out network cables, taking out a token ring network at a company like Coca-Cola and installing Ethernet, to now being in cloud. And there's a whole lot in between that. What does that actually mean for you? Master the ability to unlearn and relearn, to learn new things. That's going to keep you relevant as you progress in your career. As things change, you know, we're talking about digital transformation now. We might be talking about cloud AI, machine learning tomorrow, edge computing, whatever it is. Master the ability to unlearn the old and to learn or relearn new things. So that's what I would leave you with. I've been in this industry in technology for 23, 24 years now, and that's how you stay relevant. So continuing education also. Continuing education may not necessarily mean another degree or a 4-year degree. It may be a certificate program. Nowadays, there are companies, including Google, who are looking at your ability to actually do the job more so than they are looking at how many letters you have behind your last name. The most successful people I know in technology today, and some of which who are in Google, actually do not have degrees. Do not let a 4-year degree keep you from seeking this opportunity to get into technology and to gain access to high-paying 6-figure salary jobs that could impact your economic prosperity and later on your generational wealth.
Wow. Wow. Thank you, Ronika. A great way to close us out. Again, I appreciate everyone for listening into this session. Thank you for Salesforce for sponsoring the session. Ronika, amazing job again from Google. Nicole Johnson from Salesforce, and we have Bobby Allen who added a nice flavor to this discussion from CloudGenera. I'm Damani Corbin, coming to you from WeaveWorks. We are the Kuberenets experts. Again, thanks everyone for listening in, and we'll be in the room for Q&A, so please join us and pop in your questions. Thanks everyone, and have a great afternoon.